What's up YouTube? I've got another full design walkthrough for you today. Now this one is a bit more tech themed, it's got this coded aesthetic to it, so let's jump into Photoshop and walk you through each step. So this is the final design outcome that I created. Now this one's called Pixel Perfect, and I've come up with the name as I've been developing it. As you can see, this strong grid layout, loads of these kind of tech themed assets, outline text, and this like really modern coded typography. So I'm going to walk you through each step. I spent a lot of time using adjustment layers on this. So for example here, if I use this gradient map, so I'm just going to shrink through some of the steps and combine them just so it's a little bit easier to work through. So I'm just going to dive into a new canvas here with File New. I'm going to use the same settings that I use for all of my poster design work, which is 3840 pixels by 4800. And this is in a 4:5 ratio so that it works for Instagram. The first step I took with this was creating a grid system, because this is what I was going to stick with, and I also wanted to outline the actual grid lines so that they are visible on the final piece. As you can see here, we've got these like gutters and margins here that are going the whole way around. And this is how I've constructed all of the assets within this poster. So the first thing I'm going to do is come up to View and Guides, and then New Guide Layout. Now this is the grid layout I've used for this design. So I've used 9 columns, 12 rows, the same 100 pixel gutter and margin. Now this is going to create equal gaps the whole way around. So it's going to have the same margin and the same gutter, which works for layout and placing everything in order. So I'm going to press OK here. Now I'm just going to set this background to a bit more of like a light grey. So just for ease of access, I'm just going to eyedrop tool this grey colour from the original. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over to this shape tool and grab the line. And now just following these grid lines, I'm going to draw this line down the whole way down following our grids. Set the stroke to 1 and make sure that that colour is this kind of slightly darker grey that we're going for here. So I'm going to settle about there. Now as I hide my grid lines just to check it, I'll say that's good. It's really subtle. I might make it slightly darker. There we go. With this line drawn, this is just going to be a little bit of copy and pasting, which can be a bit tedious, but you can keep compounding, which works. So I'm going to use Command J to duplicate this line, and then I'm going to drag it over to the next grid line. And now straight away, if I just do this again to our next one, and then we can start working on the copy and pasting. So from here, I'm going to highlight these last 2, Command J to duplicate, and now I'm just going to repeat this step the entire way across the board, just so that we can fill out all of these grid lines. Paste this in on our last one, and there we go. Now we've got these lines drawn in. We can just repeat the same step horizontally and then move on to the next step. Okay, so I've just named these folders here. We've got vertical grid and horizontal grid. And now you can see we've got our grid line drawn out onto the canvas. Now our next step here is just going to be drawing in these kind of background labels that we've got at the top. So I'm going to come back onto our shape tool and grab our rectangle, and then we can just start drawing in using these grid lines. So let's open them up. I'm going to set the fill to a bit of a darker grey. I'm going to remove the stroke on these. Let me go slightly darker on this. There we go. Then once again, just duplicate this just to save the settings. Let's drag that one across. I'm actually going to drag it to just about here on this grid line area. Create a duplicate. And this is where you can really start to construct your kind of your layout and your composition of where you want everything to go, which is really good when you're working with this kind of square grid, because there is so many options of how to format it and you can place them just about anywhere. Just take some time to make sure that they're lined up. And then for the moment, we can just hide our grid lines so that we can work with the originals. So I'm going to drag them down a little bit just to give it a little bit of contrast between the size of the panels. And now I'm going to highlight all of them and come into our little properties panel here. Now on this curve edge area, I'm going to play with some different values to see what we can work with. Now I want to curve them slightly, but not too much. If I look at the original, you know, we've got this really subtle curve on the edges. Some of them don't. So what I'm going to do is set the overall value to, let's say, about 20. You know, unlink all of these values so that they're not the same. Make these 2 corners sharp, as well as these 2 top corners. Set this to 0. There you go. It gives a little bit of contrast between the labels. You know, just play around with these, get the options you like, and go from there. I'm just going to group all of these together and name it labels. Now we can just start working in some of the content on these labels. So in this top left one, I've tried to create this kind of logo graphic by just typing in my initials. Now scrolling through my typefaces, I found this typeface called NeoPixel, which I'm going to allocate here. Make sure that this is all set to lowercase, and then I'm going to set this tracking to optical, the kerning to optical, I'm sorry. So now with this kerning set to optical, I'm just going to adjust the size slightly and pull this in to our square corner. Now from here, set your placement and your sizing. I'm going to try and line it up with this margin here just for the sake of keeping it within the layout. And then you can see in comparison to this original, I've kind of custom edited this slightly. I've added this top bar in. So what I'm going to do is grab the rectangle tool, and now from the top corner of this to the corner of this, I'm going to add in this rectangle, remove our stroke, and now I'm going to adjust the top corners just so they are curved as well. So on this top one, let's put 20 and 20 on this rectangle. And now you're not going to notice any difference here. That is because on our text layer, what I'm going to do is right click this, convert this to a shape, and now drag in our anchor points. So I'm going to double click the point, make sure that this is on direct selection tool, And now you can double click your anchor points and drag them in. So I'm just going to drag them down just so that we can reveal that curve. There we go. So now you can see we've got this kind of like binding top bar across the text that works in really well with the rest of the curves on it. So now I can group these, name this, then just add in a few more type assets. So I'm just going to draw in a text box, and then to create some space between each piece of text, I'm going to just use the tab key. I'm going to name this pixel. And then on this little section of text, I'm going to right align it. And now on the line below, we can put in tab, L, tab, graphic designer. There we go. So just simply formatting that text, place that at the bottom here. And now we can just move in a few of these kind of like modern shapes just to kind of fulfill this layout. So now using the left-hand edge of this text as a guide for the grid placement, I'm just going to create a few rectangles, then use the margins to kind of align them where I like, and then make sure that they're both selected, reselect this chain, and then just curve the edges of these. Now you can just play around with the placement of these and work in a few more shapes just to fill up the width of the grid. So I'll make a few circles here, duplicate this, and then fill that out. And make sure to group all of these, like group all the similar assets just so you know what to format. And now on this original, you can see this kind of like really faint coded text. Now I've just used ChatGPT to develop this, just to generate some random coded errors, just to fit in with the theme of it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just copy and paste these over from the original. So yeah, just bringing these in over from the original, you can see it's just really simple formatting. I've just used text boxes for each one, make sure that they're all highlighted and they are the same color as the remaining text. And then I've really focused on trying to align these with every other piece. So I'm trying to align it with the bottom of that text line there, align it with this text box here, and then make sure that they are in place horizontally and vertically. It's kind of this modern coded aesthetic typeface. It's amazing, and I wanted to focus the entire piece on this typeface. And our key for time saving with this kind of style is reuse your assets. So for example here, I'm going to grab this rectangle and these three circles, then I'm going to duplicate them, drag them out of their original folder and regroup them. Now I can use this as an asset in these corner labels here, just to really tie in the theme of this design together comprehensively. Make each one slightly different just so it's not a direct copy, have some sort of variant. Then what I'm going to do is drag in my logo here just to place in this top corner. Now I'm going to color overlay this and set this to the same color as our background here. Now for our main title here, we're going to be using the typeface ductile display, which I'll show you just here. Once again, fits really well in with the theme, and I'm just going to type in the word pixel here. Make sure that my tracking my kerning is set to metrics. Then I'm just going to put this on -10 tracking. Align it with our grid. I'm going to make sure this is left aligned along this left margin here, and then I can just increase the size on the panel. Now I want this to align just to the edge of this column here. There we go. This fits perfectly within the columns, and it leaves us this small square area just here. We're going to use the rectangle tool and draw a full width rectangle. We're going to make sure this is set to the same color as our labels. Remove the stroke, which we have done, and then set those curved edges to about 20 pixels. Now I'm also going to grab this circle asset just here, just drag this out, and then put this just above our rectangle here, just to add some kind of depth to this shape itself. And I can put these, let me just combine those together using Command E, duplicate it, and I'll drag them over to the other side as well. Kind of looks like it's been pinned down now, which is good. So now I'm going to highlight these, make sure that they're grouped, just name this full or width line. And I'm just going to create this kind of odd pattern I've got going on here. So once again, we're just using the rectangle to create the base label. Now I'm just going to drag it to the same height as the top of our text. So I'm just going to use this vertical line as a base. Once again, curve our edges in, and then I'm going to duplicate this and hold Option to bring this in. I'm going to make sure that this feels like a margin within our box, so get those edges accurate. And now we're going to use the stroke, set it to our background color, and remove our fill. Now this is just going to create this kind of like inside line, just to accentuate whatever we have going inside. Now I'm just going to extend the width of this a little bit, make sure the placement's right. And now having a look at our pattern, all I've created here is this just shrinking size set of squares. It's kind of like a weird digital optical illusion. Get the grid lines up. Now I'm going to select our rectangle tool. And now from this kind of corner edge here, I'm just going to make a square, make sure that that fill is the same color, and repeat this, drag it to the top right corner as well. I'm going to make sure it aligns with the top of our grid. Now from here, I'm going to highlight both of these rectangles, use Command J to duplicate. I'm going to drag them across and then shrink them in so that the top of these squares here aligns. So just use that, and I'll get them so that they are corner to corner, duplicate, and then just keep repeating this until they are smaller and smaller and smaller. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that. So there we go. Now they have effectively reached each other in the center. We're going to highlight every rectangle and group one, just name this pattern, and then duplicate this and drag them across. So I believe I did this 2 or 3 times. And then from this point, I'm going to group all of these into one folder, name this pattern once again, and then that inside rectangle we previously created, I'm going to use this as an outline so that we can create a mask. So now our pattern is within this inside mask. I'm also going to increase the stroke on that just slightly. And there we go, that is that label created. Now within creating this design, when I noticed this title typeface was really cool and intricate, I wanted to isolate each letter and make that a big scale asset. So to do this, I'm just going to duplicate the pixel title and just isolate this letter P here. I'm just going to drag this in till it fits within a certain space that I'm looking for. So, just kind of fit it within like a larger square. So I'm going to drag it in just here, fit that in. And now once it's okay width-wise, we're going to convert this to a shape. Or before I do that, I'm going to create a duplicate. Convert this to a shape. And now I'm just going to use the shift key to bring that in slightly. And because this is such a subtle difference, it's going to be barely noticeable, which is fine. So now on the letter P, I'm then going to open up our duplicate we just made so that I can create the X. So same size, we're going to drag this down into our bottom corner. We're going to align this in the grid. So this is nearly done already. So I'm just going to shrink this in slightly before I do that. Duplicate, convert this to a shape, drag that within these grid lines just here. Make sure that they fit within our grid. Now we can just mess around with placement here, and I'm actually going to make them both bigger. So I'm going to fill that into this kind of grid shape, and then once again with this P, fill that into this kind of grid shape. Just scale them both up slightly. Once again, just make sure they fit within the lines, and now I can mess around with placement, and I'm going to drag this P just over the X here. So yeah. So now from this point, I'm going to make this P just an outline. So on our effects, I'm going to add a stroke. Make sure that it's set to inside and the fill type is set to color. I'm going to make this the same color as the text currently. Set OK here, and then put the fill down to 0%. And now with this X, I wanted to add a gradient overlay. Now this diagonal gradient is good. Add a stroke on that and press OK. Now I'm just going to reverse or invert the gradient on our overlay just here. So just select reverse there. And now we're going to work in this small kind of perfect text just here. Now, so I'm just going to duplicate our pixel text and add in the type perfect. So just use your transform tools. A lot of this is just simple resizing and placement, but it's all up to you. So I'm going to drag that up. And then once again, align that with the grid lines, create a duplicate, set this to a shape, and I'll fill it in within our grid pattern. Now on this text, I'm going to set this to an inside stroke and repeat that same step we did with the large P, set this to an outline, just to add that contrast against two of these darker colored elements. Now I'm just going to add in a few shapes and patterns just to kind of fill out this layout that you can see in the original. So now I'm just going to add these simple circles as well as create this pattern here. Now this is created using the same steps as we did to create this. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So ellipse tool, paste this across, fill this in within the layout, then grab our rectangles, start building this pattern. Now just combine all of the rectangles you've made, Command J to duplicate, drag this over to the other side. There we go. Now we've got this cool kind of like this kind of like falling inside pattern we've got going on here. Looks a little bit like a optical illusion. Now I'm going to group this, create a duplicate, and just move two of these in a larger scale just down to this bottom corner here. You can hold shift so that you can adjust them to the grid lines, and there we go. Now I'm just going to group all of these groups and just name them illusions. Now from here we can just bring in our images. Now both of these are sourced from Unsplash, and I just kind of typed in pixel art or this kind of like generated 3D imagery just to fit within the theme. I wanted this coded look, this kind of techie, real clean aesthetic. So from both of these images, I'm going to just work through them one by one. I'm going to grab this kind of like cubic looking post, bring our grid lines up, and now I can see that this is made slightly different to the original as this perfect text was slightly more narrow, but I can just work this in. So I'm just going to shift this image over slightly and then create a mask within our grid lines just here. Set the mask on. I've also noticed I've got some effects already on here, so let me clear these. And I'll just unclip this chain here and we can start moving around our image just to kind of fit it within the frame we've got. And I think just there is good for me. Now we can reveal our second image, place this underneath. I believe this is already fit perfectly for the grid lines. So let's move that in. Yep, fits completely perfect. So now from this point, I can just group these both and just name them images. Now I wanted to add a gradient map onto these just so that they fit within our simple color scheme. So within this folder, I'm going to add a gradient map in and then use Command, Option, and G to pin it to the image beneath. If you don't have the keyboard shortcut, right click on this and select Add Clipping Mask. So now from here, I'm going to make sure that our gradient icon is selected here and then open our gradient map. Set the darker color to the label color we have and set the lighter color to the background. I'm quite happy with how this looks for the moment. And then what we're going to do is duplicate this gradient map, pin it to the next image, and then we're going to invert it. So select our reverse key just here. And there we go. Now with our images sorted, we can work on to just filling in, getting these overlay effects in. And before I do that, let me just reveal our grid again, which is going to kind of tie in this look. Make sure that this is all aligned within the grid. And yeah, it's coming together really well. Now you may have also noticed from this original that we've got this kind of overlaid code text here. Now this is exactly the same as our top label code text just here. So what I'm going to do is just paste these over and I'll try and just move these in within some sort of grid line, just so there's a bit of structure to them. Now, because these are overlays, they don't have to be perfectly placed, and I'm going to drag them underneath effectively every layer except the back grid lines. Now I'm going to set the opacity down to, let's say, about 20 here. Then I can label this code overlay. And now to really bring the depth out in the image, we're going to add in a whole bunch of drop shadows, which ties into this really cool bleeding effect. So I'm going to start with our labels up here. So we have our label folder, and it encompasses all of these dark label backgrounds. So on this folder, we're going to come down to effects and drop shadow. We're going to set our color to the same color as the label. And now you're going to copy these settings just here. Now everything's on 0, put the size on 2, and the opacity can be between 80 and 100. We're going to duplicate this drop shadow with this plus button and slightly increase the size with each layer. So I'm going to set this to 4, which is double. Add another one, set this to 8, which is double that. 16, duplicate again, set it to 32. And you get the gist. So now I'm going to press OK just here, and you're going to notice I've got this really wide and dense drop shadow going on just over these labels here. Now this adds a bit of depth to the piece and kind of like creates this hovering effect. And now on all of these assets that are the same color, I'm going to copy this layer style. We're going to paste the layer style. It's going to apply that same effect. On our pixel title, we're going to paste the layer style. And now what you can do for each of these is customize them. So for example, I can remove this single drop shadow at the end on our main text. And that's going to make it slightly less depth, like slightly less dark. And now on our perfect outline here, we're going to paste layer style. Now we're going to make sure we set our fill back to 0. And then I can just start removing these drop shadows until it's just about the right level that I like. And now we've got this same kind of like bleeding effect on our outline text as well. So on our illusions folder, we're going to paste that layer style. Make sure this is all collapsed in. And now on that one, I'm going to remove one drop shadow. And then on our perfect text, we're going to copy and paste this layer style to the large P letter just here, which is the same format. Now on our image folder just here, I'm going to come onto effects and add an inner shadow. Now I'm going to set this size to, let's say, about 20, turn the opacity down a little bit, maybe to about 30, and the distance to 2. And there we go. I'm also going to make sure that this is just aligned within the grid. Now we're going to repeat this effect on the lighter steps. So just here on our pixel text, I'm going to copy this layer style. And now we're going to go to our folders with all of these assets in. So we've got this top left label assets folder just here. So we're going to paste that, set that color to the same as the text. And then on each of these revealed drop shadows, repeat that same step. Just make sure the color is the same as the text. And there we go. Now with all of our drop shadows applied, we can just move on to our texture layers, which just ties it all in together as a final piece. So this one's just going to work in 2 texture layers. One of them is going to be a solid noise layer, which we'll do first. So come down to solid color in your adjustments page, set the hex code to 80, 80, 80, and then convert the layer to a smart object. Now this is the best way to apply noise because it's a live layer. So we're going to come up to filter and camera raw filter. Then in your effects panel on the right, we're going to select that drop down as well as this drop down on the grain panel. So set your grain to 100 here. I'm going to keep the size at 25 and the roughness at 50. I'm going to press OK and change my layer mode to overlay. From here, you can judge the noise. So for example, for me here, it's really strong. So I can double click on our camera raw filter, turn this down to about 60, try again. Now when I zoom out, it's a little bit more of the level that I'm looking for. So I'm going to keep it here, just rename that layer as noise. Now I'm going to paste in our one and only texture layer. Now this is Select Text 11. This is from Daron Studio, which I'll link in the description. And the first step with this one is I'm going to set our layer mode to overlay. Now this initially is going to make everything really dark, but we're going to use levels to adjust this using Command L. So here you've got the shadows on this slider, midtones on this slider, and highlights on this one. This chart is going to show you where the light is based within the image. And if you drag 2 sliders together, it's going to increase the contrast between them. If you drag them further apart, it's going to reduce it. As well as this output levels tab, this is going to judge how much of the dark end color is put through and how much of the light end. So here I'm going to reduce the dark end output, which is going to make this a lot lighter, and then play around with this light value as well. It's going to keep it where it is. And now you can play around with your shadow slider, as well as drag your midtones in to increase contrast and play around from there. Now if I drag in my highlight slider here as well, it's going to make these lights a lot lighter, which is not what I'm looking for. So keep moving these around. And now from here, I'm going to press OK, and I'm going to set the opacity of this down to about 60. Now I'm going to duplicate this layer and set this to exclusion. Now this is going to better target the darker areas. So for this example, it's going to be the grays. And then I'm going to reduce the opacity right down to probably about 10% here. So now as I hide and reveal this, it just adds that kind of like darker tinge over the top, which kind of just ties in the lighting. And now both of these effects added, we can group all of these texture layers and just name this texture. And now to finish off the work, we're going to add a curves layer adjustment. So now I'm just going to bring our dark values down a little bit and our high values up, and then just play around with these sliders. You know, I do like this kind of like overlaying gray look. So just play around with these sliders, see if you can balance the lights. And I'm happy with these values about here. And that is our final design. So as I zoom in, you're going to notice this cool kind of like diagonal fabric texture, which overlays really well with the noise. and that applies to the dark and the light colors, keeping it comprehensive the whole way through. And then this drop shadow effect works really well with the texture as well. And there we go. Now, as always, guys, I want to thank you for making it until the end of the video. I hope you can find this useful and that you learned something that you can add to your own design process. Now, YouTube's going to recommend you another video of mine just here that it thinks you need to see. So go ahead and watch that, and I'll see you over there.